I recognize the Democrat whip.
I thank my colleague from Oregon for his statement, and I'd like to join in the chorus for just a moment and note 2 or 3 things that have not been mentioned on the floor by the other side. In fairness, I think they should. I've listened to several Republican senators today with the pie charts come to the floor and express concern, even outrage, at what is happening in this chamber. There's some legitimacy to their complaint. There are a lot of things that need to be changed. I join in with my colleague from Oregon to say we ought to put a group together to try to calmly come up with changes in Senate procedure that bring us back to the stature that this chamber once had. Today, we don't have it, and we should. There are several things I'd like to mention briefly. If you're talking about denying a voice vote or a regular roll call to an individual seeking a nomination, I call to mind what happened with our colleague at that time, JD Vance, a United States Senator from Ohio, who announced when I was chairman of the Judiciary Committee that he would no longer allow U.S. attorneys to go through with a voice vote. At that point, he said they should go through the procedure that we're now using for all nominees. And he literally stopped the process of choosing U.S. attorneys for President Biden at 63. There are over 90 U.S. attorney positions in the United States. So he did exactly what is being complained about by Republican senators, saying that we can no longer use the voice vote or unanimous consent to pick U.S. attorneys. Let the record reflect that when President Trump was in his first term, every one of his U.S. attorneys was chosen by voice vote, no record votes. Democrats were in control and gave that option to President Trump. And then Vice President Vance had an opportunity to stop it and did. He said at the time he wanted to grind the Department of Justice to a halt. I quoted that while he was standing on the floor right there. He didn't deny it. It had been quoted in the press. And so when we talk about balance and fairness in reform in the Senate, it goes both ways. Secondly, do you remember when Anton Scalia died on vacation and there was a vacancy in the United States Supreme Court? Do you recall what happened? That vacancy was protected by the Republican Senate leader, Senator McConnell, for 10 months so that Obama would not have an opportunity to fill that vacancy. He wanted to make certain that that was done by President Trump in his next term. There's another illustration of a departure from common practice and precedent for political advantage. But the last point that I want to make is one that came to mind as I listened to the senator from Arkansas come to the floor and talk about the treatment of Republicans under his experience in the Senate. We have something in the Senate called a hold, and what it means basically is when your name makes it to the calendar, the executive calendar here, which means you've gone through the background investigation at the White House, you've gone through the committee process, you've been chosen by the committee, and you come to the calendar to be considered for a position in our federal government, there's still one last hurdle, not just the vote on the Senate floor, but the possibility of a hold. Individual senators can put a hold on a nominee indefinitely. One of the most egregious examples that has happened in modern times relates to the senator from Arkansas. And let me read from an article by Frank Bruni in the New York Times on June 6, 2016. In early 2014, after decades of government and nonprofit work that reflected a passion for public service, Cassandra Butts got a reward, or so she thought. She was nominated by President Obama to be the next U.S. ambassador to the Bahamas. It wasn't an especially high-profile gig at the crossroads of the day's most urgent issues, but it was a long-standing diplomatic post that needed to be filled, and she had concrete ideas on how best to do the job. She was very excited, her sister said. The Senate held a hearing on her nomination in May 2014, and then nothing. Summer came and went, so did fall. A new year arrived, then another new year after that. When I met her last month, Mr. Bruni wrote, she'd been waiting for more than 820 days on the Senate calendar to be confirmed. She died suddenly 2 weeks later, still waiting, 50 years old. The delay had nothing to do with her qualifications, which were impeccable. It had everything to do with Washington. And then it says, at another point, Senator Tom Cotton, an Arkansas Republican, put a hold specifically on butts and on nominees for ambassadorships to Sweden and Norway. He had a legitimate gripe with the Obama administration over a Secret Service leak of private information about a fellow member of Congress, and he was trying to pressure Obama to take punitive action. But that issue was unrelated to butts and the Bahamas. Cotton eventually released the 2 other holds, but not the one on butts. She told Bruni that she once went to see him personally about it. He explained that he knew that she was a close friend of Obama's. The 2 first met at Harvard Law School, and that blocking her was a way to inflict special pain on the president. Cotton's spokeswoman did not dispute Butt's characterization of that meeting and stressed in separate emails that Cotton had enormous respect for her and her career. But that's Washington for you. A hold of 820 days. The woman waited on the calendar patiently for this ambassadorship to the Bahamas, passed away from leukemia. So when we sit down and talk about bringing civility and common sense back to the Senate, let's bring in more than just the topic of the votes as to whether there'll be record votes or whether there'll be a voice vote. That's an important issue, but it's not the only issue. Let us show the civility one on the other, Democrats to Republicans and Republicans to Democrat. And I yield the floor.
I recognize the President Pro Temp and Senator from Iowa.
Thank you. Soon we will vote on the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. Until recent years, it's been unheard of to use floor time to confirm U.S. attorneys. Typically, they're confirmed by voice vote. I regret that we have become a body where every nominee has been obstructed. U.S. attorneys keep our communities safe and ensure law and order is enforced. There are 93 U.S. attorneys in the United States. It would take more than 230 hours to confirm all of them. That is totally unrealistic, and that's not hyperbole. The Democrat obstruction of nominees is hindering law enforcement across our nation. As chairman of the Judiciary Committee, I'll continue to work across the aisle to restore common sense confirmation process for U.S. attorneys. I now ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the Kinozi nomination.
Is there objection?